And now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to the next session. It is titled Technology in Precious Metals Industry. And we will begin the session with a short presentation on the subject Digital Gold, Digital Application in Precious Metals. And may I invite Mr. Thomas McMahon, CEO, Dillon, Gage, Asia, to share with us. Let's welcome Mr. Thomas McMahon, please.
Good morning. I want to thank the SBMA, Albert and his team, and all the members of the SBMA and anybody who's traveled to Singapore. Thanks for taking your time out to come see and hear what we're going to espouse the virtues of digital metals. That's actually the biggest I've ever seen Dillon Gage. I want to just start this with just a little bit of history. Personally, I like history, and I always think it's great to tell a bit of a story. So if you look at the left side and the top, the headline there, in terms of the West, in 1933, there was a significant change in how people owned gold, specifically in the United States. And there's been questions in modern times, too. People say, could governments change how we own metal? Can it be confiscated? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. There was a precedent set in 1933. And for American citizens, at that time, the US dollar was fully backed by gold. We had an asset-backed dollar bill. It also had fungibility in Europe. And in the course of the Depression, which was global at the time, the United States had a problem with debt. Gold had been fixed at basically $16 an ounce for decades. And the issue was we owed twice that amount of money. How do we fix that? So Roosevelt said, oh, we could fix it easily. Let's confiscate all the gold in the US. Ultimately, it was about 80 million ounces. The date was May 1933. Once it was finished on May 2nd, 1933, after we had all the gold in one place, we know it as Fort Knox today, they doubled the price of gold. Gold went from $16 to $32. We subsequently sent a large part of that gold to Europe, to London and France, to Paris specifically, and the US settled its debt. The substantial difference was the dollar was still backed by gold, but not in the United States. It was still backed by gold in the rest of the world. And we can fast forward to 1944 to 1971 and the Bretton Woods Agreement. Gold technically was still the backing for the US dollar. The US dollar by default became the global currency, and everything was still very sound and stable. And then in 1971, the United States was in the midst of recession. The Vietnam War was raging. Inflation was edging up. And the Europeans lost their confidence in the US dollar. So they decided, you know, let's sort of dial back the clock to where we were in the 30s. We actually don't want paper for paper. We want, when people spend dollars in Europe, we're going to send those dollars back to the Treasury, and we want gold for those dollars. And it became a problem. So Richard Nixon, in his worldly wisdom, decided that the US dollar would no longer be settled in gold, and the world that we know today of fiat currencies came into existence. Nothing changed. The currencies all looked the same, but they became fiat. And it was basically, it was the confidence of the world on the economies that said that was what a currency was worth. And the US dollar was still the default settlement currency. But they had a problem. They needed to free trade gold. So in 1974, COMEX was formed in relation to gold. COMEX had existed for a previous 60, well, almost 70 years, but it was a silver exchange. And there was relevancy in that because during that period, from 33 to 1974, silver was the interactive backing for the US dollar to London, to the sterling market. It was the link to the commodities market. When you traded in Europe, you settled in pounds sterling. In order to settle in pounds sterling, you needed a silver hedge alongside of a dollar hedge. And it was significant because actually that's how I came into the business. My first job in Wall Street was actually a runner. And I ran silver certificates from COMEX to Morgan Guarantee Bank. I would get 90% cash from Morgan Guarantee Bank, and I would go to the clearinghouse in the New York Cotton Exchange, use that to purchase warehouse receipts in cotton. I'd take the cotton to Chase Manhattan Bank, the receipts, deposit them. Chase Manhattan would loan me 90% against that, and I go back to the futures exchange and start the trade all over again. Every 30 days we do a cycle, but it was all based on silver warehouse receipts on COMEX. 2 years forward, the formation of Dillon Gage, and that's what we're going to talk about today. It's relevant because if you look at the history of gold in the modern times for us and what we know in the world going forward, and jump a little bit further into 2003, the interim from 1976 to 2003 was a very significant role of COMEX and the gold trading markets. I was part of the markets in the early 80s. I'll put some perspective on the valuation. 1981, COMEX, as an exchange at the peak of gold at heading towards $800, was actually the most valuable commodity exchange in the world. In 1981, it was worth 35 times more than the oil markets at that time, New York Mercantile Exchange or the IPE in London. And COMEX actually bid for NYMEX at that time. We turned down the bid. We stayed independent. I was on the oil markets also. By 1994, NYMEX was worth 24 times what COMEX was, and NYMEX bought COMEX. And so the relevancy of gold changing and shifting and value propositions, it's always been there. We're now in another systemic shift. And if we jump forward to today, digital gold, the New World Order, and gold ownership. And if you look at the value proposition, a cost-effective method of purchasing gold is really what I think is the most significant part of digital or the digitization of metal. We're seeing a systemic shift in portability of the metal, fungibility of the metal, and interoperability across systems that allow for the transfer of wealth. And it goes back to the fact that gold is money. We had sort of lost that in the paper world. We lost that sort of in the ETF world. COMEX in 2002 was not particularly a valuable asset. It was tradable. Average daily volumes were about 50,000 contracts a day. And at the launch of the first ETF, which grew from the first one in terms of Australia onto London and New York, it basically tripled the daily volumes for COMEX. It also allowed for a deeper liquidity pool for hedging, not just within the US or the European markets, but also in the Asian markets prior to the Shanghai markets developing. If we jump forward from there, basically, if we start looking at what are the key attributes, so relative to DG Gold, which is my product, but it's relevant to the whole industry, 4/9 pure gold. We can do this digitally, and we can do it in terms of an asset-backed model. Fully backed and stored. Ours currently is within the Canadian Mint. We find efficiencies there. They're a best partner with Dillon Gage, but they're also best partners with a number of entities within this room. I can see faces that have interaction with the mints, whether it's taking metal, working within the pool gold vaulting exercises as a supplier, or as a swap. The other thing that I find most interesting in digital, I'm sure a lot of you guys are very aware of this, is the fact that incremental purchases, the ability to take it down to fractional ownership models, so you can face not just retail, but also gives you a pure hedging to take it down to 1 gram levels, which we're capable of. In terms of DG Gold specifically, we've gotten to the point where we have no fabrication additional costs, management or storage fees are not additional. So basically, we have been able to take them away and internalize those within DG. Key to the blockchain, auditability, not just in weeklies or monthlies or quarterlies. We have the ability to get down to granular audits in real time. And I think that's really important, especially in this global world, in terms of how you look at source material, provenance, beneficial ownership, and again, to interoperability and portability. Can you fungibly swap that within a closed organization, or can it go X your platform to become a true currency again, or a true collateralized asset? Wallet ID and the ability to track and verify ownership, which goes again back to provenance and beneficial ownership, which can be a question at any time, especially operating in Asia more so than North America and Europe, where you've got vaults separated by large swaths of water. Somebody says, oh yeah, I own gold in Hong Kong. Where is it? It's in Brinks. Great, okay. Can you give me any provenance on that? No, I've owned it for 5 years. Well, give me something beyond 5 years. People actually, for whether it's for lack of record keeping or with intent, you can't do that today. Going forward from here, under the new regulatory regimes and where the world is going to demand provenance and tracking, taxation, cross-border transferability, inheritance and such, you have to have proof. The blockchain architectures and the digital ledger architectures that we've adopted internally, but also the industry is adopting, gives you that proof going forward. And we as a technology, we've developed a broad spectrum of APIs which allows for not just us operating as a platform for ourselves. We make a two-way price, 24/6. We have the ability to take it down to a 1 gram level. We both buy and sell, and we do that efficiently, as well as managing the storage, as well as managing the ability to swap your metal, to take your digital metal, and we created. Anybody who was here for the CME yesterday, you saw speaking about EFPs, and EFPs are exchange of futures for physicals, where you're turning paper into a physical swap. We're going to do the same thing within the digital industry. We're going to do what are called EDPs and ETPs. We'll exchange digital for physical, and we'll exchange tokens for physical. So we're going to both be adaptive on our own platform, but also adaptive on the platforms that we're launching secondarily off of the DG backbone. So we operate independently, but we can support other companies. I have a few entities here that we've been in conversation with over the years, or over the months, I should say, recently, to take their concept of what is the new token economics model. How do you take gold into an asset-backed? How do you take it into a token economics model? How do you take it into a currency model? How do you cross borders? How do you create portability and fungibility? We can support that from our architecture, and as part of the legacy going back to 1976 and how we have evolved, but not just us evolving, the industry is evolving. And the concept of regulation is very important. Operating just within one silo in terms of the digital industry is very important to be adaptive. Look at the regulators that you want to work with, but also be able to cross the borders and have some standards in terms of your ethics, how you adopt and what are your clients, what is your KYC, what are your AML programs. We've all integrated that in terms of Dillon Gage with very much a legacy of how we had always done that on how someone opened an account. We've now been able to take that into the digital age. The target market for us, the precious metals IRA, that's very much an American concept, IRA, individual retirement accounts, but it's not. I mean, if you were in Australia, you'd call it a superannuated fund. We can address that. If you were in Hong Kong, you'd be in a trust architecture, and there's actually a program going on at the Shangri-La today with a number of major trusts that manage about $4 billion in assets in Hong Kong that own gold today, but they own gold very inefficiently. We've been working with them. They've got about a 5% allocation to metal within their pensions. It sits in a vault and costs them dearly in their carry costs. We as an entity at DG, but also other entities here, you can adapt and adopt. And you can show them how they can own metal efficiently in the same form and potentially in the same location, but at a more efficient cost. Instead of having a kilobar sitting in a vault and just costing or deteriorating over time, we can put it into a pool gold account at the Canadian Mint and create basically a zero cost for you in terms of your carry. That's a huge improvement in terms of an asset class acquisition. Additionally to that, asset-backed programs, and I touched on that, we're working with a number of partner firms going forward. We've not just looked at this in terms of a silo as a benefit for Dillon Gage as a broader entity, but as DG Metals, again, as a launch pad. We see the opportunity to support the industry in a broad stroke, take the legacy of Dillon Gage and all its years and knowledge and expertise, and also for ourselves learn from the industry too, and support it in a broad stroke. The same way that the different minting entities had supported Dillon Gage over time, the national mints, the different warehousing partners that we've had over time, we're now stepping from that. We're going to take that and bring it into the new age order of what digital metals are. So just to wrap up so we can move along really well, Three words are really important to me in terms of where we are today. One is adapt. We're not a new industry. We're an industry in transition. We need to adopt. Adopt best practices in the new digital blockchain, if you want to call it that, distributed ledger architectures, if you want to call it that, token economics models, if you want to call it that. It's adoption of best practices and evolution. And basically, from the next step is digitize. It will be the next step. We've gone from a 4,000-year-old industry that has continued to evolve over time. It's evolved in the last 25 years. It can evolve again. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. McMahon. Thank you.